Hello, my name's Morag Gamble. I'm the founder of the Permaculture Education Institute, and for the last 25 years or so, permaculture's been my life. It's been the way that I work, it's where I live, it's the type of projects I get involved in, and also the sorts of projects that I visit when I travel. So this 4-part series, I really wanted to share with you what is permaculture. Why does it matter that we explore permaculture? Why does the world currently need more permaculture now than ever? What is permaculture design, permaculture education? And how can permaculture be woven into not just being a way of life or a way of gardening, but also a livelihood? So this 4-part series will take a step-by-step through those different questions, and I hope you enjoy. So what is permaculture? Permaculture is a word that was created by Bill Mollison and David Holmgren back in the 1970s. And the term was a combination of 2 words, permanent and agriculture. So permaculture. Now, though, it's more described as being permanent culture, permaculture. And by that, it's not just saying that it's stuck in time. It's actually looking at, well, how can we live a way of life that is regenerative, that is able to be continued on, and how can we live a way of life that is not just supporting humans but all life on this planet when we are presently in a ecological and climate crisis. And permaculture is actually one of those tools, practical strategies and solutions that is really needed in the world today. So permaculture has been practiced by people all around the world. In just about every country in the world, permaculture has rippled out. And it's rippled out by a process of people teaching people. And it's just gone from a ripple to a wave around the world. So there would be more than 1 million people. Actually, we don't know how many people are doing permaculture, but we do know that there's a massive movement with teachers in every community doing permaculture. And they're doing it because they know that it matters. They're doing it because they know that they can make a positive difference in the world. They're doing it because it's the life that they want to live, that's in connection between the way they think and the way they want to act. And also it's a way of making a really good livelihood in terms of actually having your work being permaculture as well. So how did I get into permaculture? Well, it's kind of a bit of a long story, but I remember as a young kid hearing about permaculture. So if permaculture started in the 1970s, I must have been under 10 when I first started hearing about permaculture. I remember my dad talking about it. He'd heard Bill Mollison on ABC radio talking about it, and Bill was such an amazing speaker about it and was so convincing and elaborate in the way that he spoke about it, that my dad, who was always really conscious about ethics and sustainable ways of living, just picked up on this and thought it was absolutely fantastic. And so I remember hearing, ever since I was a child, that permaculture was really the best, most common sense way of living. That's how it was presented to me, that it was something that just made good common sense, and that if we had our wits about us, we would all be doing it. And so kind of that's the sense of what I grew up with it. And so as I moved into my teenagehood, I found myself becoming a spokesperson for the environment and a spokesperson for peace, getting involved in peace rallies and environment movement. And eventually I ended up at university, where I decided I would study a Bachelor of Environmental Planning and Design, because I really wanted to find a way that I could integrate that way of thinking into a professional world, that it wasn't just something that I did as a sideline. It was actually central to my way of life. And after I did that, I also did a landscape architecture course. But something about doing those courses left me feeling quite empty. They were really great, don't get me wrong. There was some fantastic knowledge about, geomorphology and landscape and design and all those different sorts of underpinning knowledge that I think was really important to weave with permaculture. But there was really nothing about what it meant to live a good life, what it meant to create resilient societies, what it meant to actually grow food. And landscape architecture was never incorporating food in the landscape, for example. So I started putting those things into the landscape architecture work that I was doing. And I remember hearing one day one of the lecturers saying to me, "Oh, you know what? Design with nature, that's passé." And I felt absolutely gobsmacked that someone could say that. But on the other hand, there was other people who were saying that really that's the way that we need to go. And so, there was a bit of a balance, but I felt kind of empty in there. So I headed off on a bit of a pilgrimage. A lot of the work that I'd been doing had connected with ecological thinking, systems thinking. So I was looking through Bill Mollison's book. I kept coming across people like Fritjof Capra and Vandana Shiva and Fukuoka. So I found a place in England, actually, that Fritjof Capra was teaching a 5-week course on systems thinking. So at Schumacher College, it had just begun then. It's now been going since the early 90s, a place where amazing thinkers would come, and in a learning community where you cooked together, grew together, ate together. There was meditation, there was yoga, and there was learning and deep conversation and a lot of dialogue consistently. It was an amazing learning community. So to go there and spend 5 weeks with Fritjof Capra learning about systems thinking, and all of a sudden everything just seemed to kind of click and make sense. And while I was there, I met a woman called Helena Norberg Hodge. And Helena was running something called the International Society for Ecology and Culture, which has now been renamed Local Futures, I think. And she spent a lot of time in Ladakh. And she told the group about this place, Ladakh, on the other side of the Himalayas, where it was a culture that had lived for thousands of years in a sustainable way, where everything came from the earth and went back to the earth. And that it was a simple life, a life that would possibly be considered to be one of the poorest of the poor, yet there was something rich and textural and absolutely amazing about this way of life. And lessons, really important lessons, that the interface between that culture and our culture that were being seen. So when that culture bumped into Western culture, it started to erode. People started to abandon their whole foods and be buying unnatural foods. They'd abandon their natural clothing and buy synthetic clothing with the thought that it was progress and development. And that their houses, their traditional mud brick houses that they built out of the earth around them and crafted with natural wood windows that they'd handcrafted and carved designs in, were starting to be seen as backward and primitive in, preference for a concrete box in the city, which required importing of food, importing of water, the purchasing of everything. So it's that commodification of life and the shift that in order for us to live well, we're having to move in a particular direction. And that direction being about extracting resources, becoming commercial with everything we need, from everything from childcare to food to building to our education, everything. And so this contradiction, or this juxtaposition, should I say, between the two cultures was mind-blowing. And being there in Ladakh, so I went to volunteer with Helena in Ladakh for that summer. And something shifted in my mind. It was particularly when I was holding a piece of bread, and it was one of their breads, their traditional breads. And I was there with the mother that I was staying with, Amalé, and I'm sure there were sparks flying out of my head because it was the most amazing moment. It's simply eating a piece of bread. Now, the difference was that this piece of bread, I'd seen it from right from the very scratch, grown, harvested, and I was involved in that. So, for example, when we were out in the fields, tending the fields were filled with 9 seeds in each field. It wasn't a monoculture. It was small polycultures that were hand-tended, and they were tended with the help of yaks. Now, the thing about the yaks was that not everyone had to have all the yaks. There would be one yak in one family and another yak, or zo. It was a combined zo. It's a cow and a yak. And so each family would have one. And they would bring them together to do the harvest and the threshing. And there'd be songs that would go with this too. So when you were threshing, when you were separating the grain from the stalk, you would tether up the does together, and they would go around in a circle, and you'd sing them a song of thanks as they were going around, and you'd walk with them and you'd interact, and you'd be putting more bunches of the grain down and pulling out the hay, and then at the end you'd scoop up all the grain and you'd need to thresh it, and there'd be another song that went with that, and it was more of a whistle. And of course you'd want to whistle when you're threshing, otherwise you just get a gob full of chaff. And so we went through this process, and then that grain got collected and was carried down to a mill that was powered by water. So it was a slow stone mill that was powered by the water. And this channel was collected from way, way up high in the Indus, and it was taken off the Indus high up and then channeled along on the contour. And then right when it had got to the village, they dropped the water down. That water powered the grain mill, and the grain mill went around, and there was a little wooden flask on the top, and the grain was in here, and as the wheel went around it knocked this, and so little bit by little bit the grain went out. So it was very slow. It was ingenious, simple technology. So anyway, then you gather the grain and you take the grain up into the house, and in order to raise that, make it rise, they used yogurt. And the yogurt came from milking the zoes. So you'd go and milk the zoes, and then you'd make the yogurt and mix that up into this beautiful dough. And then to cook that up, there was these earthen pots. And so the pot was where you kind of made your patty of the dough and stuck it on inside. And that was fueled actually by zoe dung. And so the dung was also collected from these animals. Some of it was put back into the fields, and some of it was made into patties and stuck on the side of the earthen houses. And these houses then, as they were absorbing the heat, would then kind of dry out these patties, and they would be collected, and that would cook up these breads. And then when you got your bread out, you would put a little bit of butter on it, and it was zoe butter. And so after you'd milked the zoe, you'd separate off the cream, and then you'd churn the butter, and that butter was put on the bread, but also made into butter tea, which was a delicacy there. So you can imagine, as I was sitting there with this piece of bread and thinking through, not really consciously, but just embodying this sense of connectedness to the land, to all the animals, to the community that was part of it, hearing the songs up and down the valley and knowing exactly where each family was in terms of their harvest process, and the coming together at the end of the harvest festival and being part of a ceremony. It was this very small insight or adventure into what it meant to live in that way of life. But for all those years, I'd talked about living sustainably, I'd read about living sustainably, I'd dreamt that this was what we needed to do, but I'd never actually experienced what it meant to live a sustainable life. And there in Ladakh, I had an experience of what that really meant. And I saw that it was possible. We have this idea that there are no alternatives. It's the Tina thing. There is no alternative. There are so many alternatives, except that we feel that we're trapped into this particular way of life. And so I came back to Australia. I actually went back to do a lot more studies at Schumacher College. I wasn't finished there yet, so I studied with Vandana Shiva, people looking at deep ecology and seed sovereignty, ecological design, a whole range of different topics, and started implementing permaculture gardens in and around the college as well, and started doing things like wood carving, working with your hands, so head, heart and hands, this connectedness, that it's not just about getting out and doing, and it's not just about, sitting and being, or it's not just about the academics and the thinking. How do we bring those thoughtfully and consciously together in a very holistic way that means that we can move forward, and that life on this planet will have a future, that humanity has a future. What a beautiful and amazing and awesome planet that we live in. Every day I'm absolutely amazed when, different birds or animals or insects or plants or flowers, and you look at it and it's absolutely extraordinary. We live in an amazing world with amazing cultures and amazing people, and the children that we bring into this world, all absolutely phenomenally awesome. And I really would love that to continue. I would love for our world to thrive with abundance and not head into a kind of doomsday scenario, which many people are saying is on its way. I'd like to think that there's another alternative. And that alternative is a permaculture alternative. It's a way of living a simple life. It's a way of living a life that lives within the Earth's capacity. And it's possible. Actually, someone said the other day, and it really struck with me, because they're saying, well, we actually don't have a climate crisis or an environment crisis or this crisis or that crisis. And I'm thinking, hang on a tick, what are you saying? They said, and I think it absolutely makes sense, we have a consumption crisis. So it's when we say that we have a climate crisis, yes, we do, but that still takes it out there. Something wrong with the climate, or we have an environment crisis. There's something wrong going out in the environment. Or we have an economic crisis. There's something going wrong in the economy. But when we say we're having a consumption crisis, then it's about us. It's about what we do as a society. And so there is also the argument to say that, well, it's not all just us, what we do in our own little households, that makes a difference. It's the corporations. It's the governments. Yes, and it's both. We all need to change, and actually, it's about a shift in perception about how we live in connection with our land, how we as decision makers, because all the leaders of government, all the leaders of enterprises are also people, and so if we can start to shift our perception about what it means to live and live well, and what the imperative is that everything that we design and do now needs to be under the framework that we're living a one planet life. What does that mean? Well, if there's these studies out that are all about ecological footprint, and you may well have heard of these. So what that means is that if we add up the amount of conceptual footprint that we have in terms of how much resource that we use and how much waste that we produce, that the earth needs to meet our needs and absorb our waste. So if everyone lived like a typical Australian, the ecological footprint of everyone would be 4 Earths. You only have one. So what does that mean? What that means is that we need to find a way to actually reduce our footprint by, 80%. Well, wouldn't it be great if we reduced it even more, so then our life becomes regenerative, so that what we're doing is actually contributing to the restoration of the soils, contributing to the reforestation of the planet, contributing to the rebalancing of the water cycles, that we're actually not drawing from nature, that we're actually putting back collectively. And so this is a really important thing, because if we think about the imperative of all of our decisions and all of our household designs, our business, our workplace, our education systems, that everything that we do, if we think about how we can do that within that framework of living a one planet life, that's where permaculture comes in and helps us to design. Because permaculture at its core has 3 ethics. So earth care, people care, and fair share. So say if we take those ethics into our garden design. So we say, how can we design our garden that is caring for the earth? So we're looking at ways to actually integrate as many different species so that it provides habitat for wildlife, that we're replenishing the soil so that we're creating living soils, not degrading the soils, that when the rains come, like they've just come now, that the soil is able to just drink that up rather than it running off and causing erosion and pollution elsewhere. That in our gardens that we're not using chemicals or pesticides, that it's natural. That we're able to meet many of our needs for food locally within our garden and do it in a way that's compact. So the more compact that we can live our lives, that makes more space for nature. And presently, in today, we need to make more space for nature. We've lost at least half of the world's forests. We need to replant those. We need to regenerate water systems. We need to regenerate the forest systems. We need to regenerate the soil. We need to repair the earth. Really what we need to be doing right now is rolling up our sleeves and getting into the work of earth repair. So that's kind of the earth care part of it. And that starts in our garden, where we can see the direct impact of that work that we do. And it's a joyful work, coming out here and planting some cuttings of things and helping to mulch and coming out and harvesting a range of beautiful foods to eat every meal. It's a really amazing joy. And the food that you get from that is just, it's different. It's really different. I find it very hard to actually go and buy greens anymore in a store or other vegetables. I sort of walk past and there's a sense of lifelessness about them because, as soon as you start to harvest food from a garden, it starts to diminish its it's starting to degrade. It's losing its vitality, and it's also losing its nutrient quality. So the most nutrient-dense, healthiest food that you can get is what you can grow around you. So I just try and fill in around my home here as many different fruits and herbs and vegetables and spices. And so this is chia, I've got Suriname spinach, there's bananas, there's citrus, turmeric. I just surround myself with food that I can come in at any time and just harvest, and doing it in a way that's full of perennials and self-seeding plants and tree crops, so that the vegetable garden is not sort of your standard veggie plot. It's more of a forest garden. It's a garden that replicates how nature works. It's a garden that in a way becomes self-managing, so that I can go away and visit my family, or I can go and do permaculture work overseas and come back. And there's always something to harvest. And it's managing itself in a large way because it's designed to draw in the moisture, it's self-mulching, it's perennial plants. And so these are the sorts of things that we learn in permaculture design, is about how to set up resilience, because we really do need to create community resilience, which is really part of people care. How can we set up systems that support well-being, health and well-being of our families, of our neighbourhoods, of our communities, and also of people in other parts of the world? So if we choose to have foods that are grown in a way that is actually destroying other people's livelihoods or destroying the dignity of other people, that also isn't such a great thing. So really a core part of permaculture too is recognising that our actions and our gardens and our work and our livelihoods really needs to come back to that basis of caring for people. And so earth care, people care, and fair share. And I've kind of alluded to the fair share part of it a little bit already, that meaning that this garden is not just for me. It's also for, gosh, look, it's all hot and subtropical. It's just had a rain in it, and it's I'm sweating. So a fair share is in my garden. It's not just a garden for me and my family. This garden is also for the wildlife. This garden is a place where abundant species of birds and lizards and frogs and bees and butterflies. I'm just watching a little hornet go through. Before there was a rainbird that swished across. It's a place where they live. We've recently had a drought in this area, and the little fruit bats were dying. We were finding them hanging in trees. And so I noticed that they're actually coming to come here as a place of refuge. And that is really important, that we create refuges in and amongst the landscape. And our backyards can be refuges. Our backyards can be habitats, that we have water and food and spaces for them to hide. And do you know what, though? The thing is that I found the more that I create this is a place for wildlife as well, the less pests I have as a problem, because it's in balance. So all these little shrubs are places for little insectivorous birds to come and hide, and then they come in and peck off all the insects that are maybe on something else, and it just finds its own balance. And the key thing too is that I've found over time is that if things are consistently having problems, then maybe not grow them. Like, what are the things? If I walked away from here for a couple of weeks and came back and they were still growing beautifully, they're the core things. That's kind of like the structure of the garden. And they are the perennial greens and the tree crops and the tree legumes and all the plants that self-seed. I can't remember the last time I planted a pumpkin, but yet I have pumpkins all the time. And as a matter of fact, I have some pumpkins that are sprawling out in front of me here, and tomatoes. And interestingly, actually all parts of the pumpkin are edible. all the leaves, all the flowers and the shoots, the skin, the seeds, and of course the orange flesh. And this is another part that I think is really important to consider when we're thinking about permaculture and growing our own food and reducing food waste, which is a massive issue. Over 50% of what is grown gets wasted. This is the kind of like the typical figure, somewhere between 30 to 50%. I would hazard a guess that probably maybe closer to 90% of the stuff that we grow gets thrown away. If you think of the pumpkin crop, for example, commercially, we only ever get the pumpkin, and then we throw away a lot of that bit and just keep the little orange bit. All of the plant is edible. This is chia. Chia is an edible plant, but yet we only, can buy the seeds. There are so many taro, turmeric. All of the leaves of those are edible. All of these different parts of plants, beetroot tops, celery tops, broccoli leaves, broccoli flowers. Like, how much of the food that's grown in our gardens can we actually eat and is really healthy? And in that way, we can reduce our footprint because we don't need to grow so much. We don't need as much space to grow because we're using all sorts of things and things that just keep growing and are very hardy in our climate, in our environment. So kind of they're the core things around what I see important as kind of the earth care, people care and fair share. So the fair share for the animals, but also fair share, as I mentioned too, for other people. So, is our way of life actually contributing to someone else's lack of dignity, loss of traditional culture, the loss of land? Or is it actually contributing to supporting them to maintain a high quality of life too? So, it's thinking holistically in all different dimensions of our life. And it's really helping us to kind of expand the way that we see how we can be in this world, to be peaceful contributors, active contributors. Like I said, rolling up the sleeves, but that doesn't necessarily mean hard yakka. It means thoughtful action on an everyday basis and using design thinking to come up with positive and practical solutions that can help us to address this sort of multi-crisis that we're in. And much of that is about shifting our perception and shifting the way that we see ourselves in connection with the world. And so this is kind of at the core of permaculture. It's really a philosophy. It's a way of life. And then that rolls out into every part of our life. Once you start to learn about permaculture, it's hard to separate. And I think maybe permaculture has been misunderstood as just a kind of gardening technique. And I would say that gardening is certainly a key part of permaculture because it is about relocalizing our food system. It's about meeting our needs as close to home as possible, to compressing our ecological footprint, and therefore gardening is a central part of that, edible gardening. But it's, as I hope from what I've just talked about, there's very much more about it. Permaculture is essentially designed for regenerative culture. It's designed for one planet living. It's about creating community resilience. It's about creating resilience in your home. It's about bringing back living soil. It's about regenerating our natural systems. It's about living on this planet as if life mattered. So permaculture is about design. It's about sharing that design knowledge. And it's also about contributing to your community and to the planet in a way that is regenerative. So Permaculture Education Institute is all about helping to share how to design and guiding you through a process of designing your own place, a community garden, a school garden. And it also helps you to learn how to share this, because I think one of the most important things that we do need in this world at the moment is more permaculture teachers. I would love to see permaculture teachers everywhere and permaculture ambassadors speaking up for what it is that the world needs right now. So I hope you enjoyed the first video. Come back for video number 2, and I'll dive more into what it is to be a permaculture designer or a permaculture educator. What are the opportunities that are out there, both here in Australia, but globally too, to do that work and to make permaculture your way of life and your livelihood too. Thanks for listening.